They called me the old lady while they drained my savings and laughed about it online. But when they landed at the airport, the police were waiting for them, and the look on their faces was worth every tear I cried. Hello, my name is Mildred. I'm 74 years old, and this is my story. Before I begin, I'd like to know, where are you watching from? I always love hearing where people are tuning in from, because no matter where we live, betrayal has a way of finding us, doesn't it? Now, let me take you back just a few months ago. I was living a simple, steady life. My days were predictable. A morning walk down my quiet street, tending to my little garden in the afternoon, and evenings spent with a cup of tea and the photographs of my late husband. We didn't have a glamorous life, but we built a solid one. Every penny was earned, every dollar stretched, and I carried that discipline with me even after his passing. My son, David, and his wife, Lacey, were a big part of my world, or so I thought. I welcomed Lacey into our family with open arms. I gave her the recipes my own mother had passed down to me. I bought her little gifts on holidays, and when their finances were tight, I offered help. I didn't think twice about it. After all, family was family. Because I trusted them, I allowed David limited access to one of my credit cards. Just for emergencies, I told him. I wanted him to know that if life threw a storm his way, he wouldn't have to weather it alone. For years, that arrangement sat quietly in the background, hardly touched, until, one morning, everything changed. It started with a knock at my door. My neighbor, a kind woman named Teresa, stood on the porch, phone in hand, her expression somewhere between pity and awkwardness. "Mildred," she said softly, "I thought you should see this before it spreads around." I frowned, took her phone, and there it was, a post on Lacey's social media, a picture of her boarding a plane with my son, champagne glass in hand, grinning ear to ear. The caption read, "Finally, a trip without the old lady." The old lady. That's me. For a moment, I couldn't even process it. My ears rang, my heart dropped, and Teresa's voice felt far away. I laughed nervously, thinking it must have been some sort of joke taken out of context. But then my phone buzzed on the table behind me, and buzzed again and again. Bank alerts, one after another. Charges I didn't recognize. Airline tickets, luxury hotel reservations, restaurants with bills that made my stomach turn. Thousands of dollars gone in a matter of hours. I sat down hard in my chair, Teresa still standing there, watching my face lose its color. "They wouldn't," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "They couldn't." But they did. I opened my banking app, and there it all was in black and white. Their smiling faces on social media matched perfectly with the withdrawals on my account. And the cruel part? Every caption they posted mocked me. Lacey joked about living like queens on grandma's dime in a comment thread that one of her friends had liked. I wasn't supposed to see it, but I did. It wasn't just the money. It was the realization that while I had been clipping coupons, carefully budgeting my pension, and setting aside something small for my future grandchildren, my own son and his wife had been laughing about me behind my back, using me, treating me like some fool they could milk for comfort and convenience. My hands shook as I put the phone down. Teresa tried to comfort me, but I could barely hear her. Memories flooded in. The nights I babysat their children for free so they could catch a break. The time I helped them with their down payment. The little sacrifices I made thinking I was building trust and love. And now, I was just the old lady, a punchline in their private jokes. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the bank statements spread out in front of me, reading and rereading each line until the numbers blurred together. Every charge felt like another knife in my back. And in that sleepless night, one truth settled deep in my bones. Trust, once broken, can never be pieced back the same way again. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't as powerless as they believed. The morning after that sleepless night, I poured myself a cup of coffee and stared at the steam rising from the mug. My hands were trembling, not just from age, but from the weight of betrayal. I've always been the kind of woman who believes in giving people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was a mistake, I told myself. Maybe David didn't realize the card was still active. Maybe Lacey exaggerated on social media. I clung to those maybes like a lifeline, because the alternative, that they had deliberately used me, mocked me, and laughed while doing it, was almost too painful to accept. But when you get older, your gut sharpens in ways you can't explain. My gut told me the truth. This wasn't a mistake. I opened my laptop and logged into my online banking again. Line after line of transactions stared back at me. Airline tickets, 2, round trip, first class. A luxury resort in the Caribbean. Fine dining with receipts that made me wince. Designer boutiques, spa packages. The total was staggering. More than I had ever spent in 1 year, let alone 1 week. It was all there. Time-stamped, undeniable. I printed the statements and laid them neatly on the dining table. My little dining room, with its lace tablecloth and vase of fading roses, suddenly looked like a crime scene. Evidence everywhere. For a moment, I sat back and closed my eyes, remembering how I had gotten here. Years ago, when David and Lacey first married, they struggled. Rent was high, jobs were unstable. I stepped in, as any mother would. I bought them groceries when the fridge was bare. I slipped $20 bills into their hands when they claimed they didn't have gas, money. And when David asked if he could have access to my card just for emergencies, I said yes without hesitation. Because what kind of mother refuses her own son when he's desperate? But this wasn't desperation. This was entitlement dressed up as a vacation. Then something else happened. Something that broke the last thread of denial I'd been holding on to. I received a message. Or rather, I shouldn't have received it at all. It was a screenshot, sent to me by mistake, from a group chat Lacey had with her friends. In it, she wrote, "You'd think the old bat would notice by now, but she's too busy counting pennies. Living like queens on grandma's dime, and she has no clue. Cheers?" My breath caught in my throat. My hands went cold. I read it once, twice, 10 times. And each time it sank deeper. They weren't just careless, they were cruel. That's when my shame shifted into something else. Something steadier. A quiet anger that didn't burn hot and loud, but cold and sharp. The kind that focuses you. I wasn't going to call them screaming. I wasn't going to beg for my money back. No, that would only give them more power. Instead, I would investigate, prepare, and let them walk straight into the consequences they deserved. So, I made a plan. First, I called my bank. I explained the situation carefully, giving them the dates, the charges, the fact that I hadn't authorized any of it. The woman on the other end was professional, but sympathetic. She told me this wasn't just a family dispute. This was fraud. Unauthorized use of a financial instrument. And given that the charges crossed state and international lines, it wasn't just a slap on the wrist situation. "Mrs. Turner," she said firmly, "I recommend you file a report with the police immediately. We'll freeze the card and flag the transactions. But to protect yourself further, law enforcement needs to be involved." Law enforcement. The words sat heavy in my chest. I'd never been the kind of person to call the police, not even when the neighborhood kids threw rocks at my fence. But now, here I was, staring at a pile of evidence against my own son and his wife. Could I really do this? Could I hand my own flesh and blood over to the authorities? I thought about it long into the afternoon. My late husband's voice echoed in my memory. He was a man of few words, but he had always been clear on one thing. "Millie, respect and trust aren't the same. Don't confuse the two." And suddenly, I understood what he meant. Respect means treating people with dignity. Trust means handing them responsibility. David and Lacey had neither respected me nor honored the trust I'd given. Instead, they had mocked me, stolen from me, and flaunted it for the world to see. So, yes, I could do this. I had to. I gathered the evidence, the bank statements, the screenshots, the social media posts. I placed them in a neat folder, labeled in my careful handwriting. Then, I picked up the phone and called the local police station. When the officer answered, my voice shook at first, but then steadied. "I need to report a crime," I said. It was the first time I admitted it out loud. And strangely, it felt like reclaiming a part of myself I hadn't even realized I'd lost. They thought I was powerless. They thought age had made me soft, blind, easy to fool. But they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The morning after filing the police report, I felt different. Not lighter exactly, but clearer. It was as if I had been stumbling through fog, and now the mist had parted just enough to show me the path ahead. The officer I spoke with, Detective Harris, invited me down to the station to give a full statement. I dressed in my neatest cardigan and pressed slacks, because dignity is something I never allow myself to lose, even when I'm trembling inside. Sitting across from his desk, I laid out my folder. The statements, the screenshots, the printouts of their smiling faces holding cocktails by the beach. He flipped through them slowly, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. Finally, he looked up. "Mrs. Turner," he said carefully, "this isn't just a misunderstanding. This is clear evidence of fraud, and given the amount, it qualifies as grand larceny." The words rang in my ears. Fraud. Larceny. These weren't family squabbles anymore. This was criminal. He leaned forward. "We can file charges. If your son and his wife are traveling, we can even coordinate with airport security when they land. But the decision to proceed, that's yours." For a long moment, I stared at my hands folded in my lap. They looked small, fragile, the skin thin with age. But in that moment, they didn't feel weak. They felt steady. "They thought I wouldn't notice," I said finally. "They thought I was just the old lady. I want to proceed." He nodded, scribbling notes, and began outlining what would happen. The bank would officially classify the charges as unauthorized. A warrant could be issued. And when David and Lacey returned from their little paradise, they wouldn't be greeted with leis and welcome home hugs. They'd be greeted with handcuffs. As he explained, something remarkable happened inside me. I felt calm, not vengeful, not hysterical, just calm. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity, showing them, and maybe even myself, that I wasn't powerless. When I returned home, I didn't call David. I didn't warn him. That would have been the old me, the mother who smoothed over every mistake, who cleaned up his messes before the consequences could land. No, this time I stayed silent. Let them laugh on the beach while the tide of justice rolled quietly in behind them. Instead, I busied myself preparing. I froze the card, opened a new account the very next morning, and changed every password I had. If they thought they could waltz back into my life and keep using me, they had another thing coming. But waiting wasn't easy. Every day I found myself checking their social media. There they were, sprawled on beach chairs, holding fruity drinks, captioning their posts with lines like, "Best trip ever. Freedom tastes so sweet. Freedom. Paid for with my sweat, my savings, my sacrifices." I printed those photos too, tucking them into my folder. Evidence upon evidence. I even started a little ritual. Every time they posted, I'd print it, slip it into the stack, and smile to myself. Each picture was another nail in the coffin they'd built with their own arrogance. One evening, as the sun set behind my garden, I thought back to a memory of my husband. It was years ago, during one of David's early screw-ups. He'd borrowed money from a cousin, gambled it away, and begged us to bail him out. I had been ready to forgive him, to scrape together what we could, but my husband shook his head. "He'll never learn if we always rescue him, Millie," he'd said, firm but sad. Back then, I hadn't listened. I always thought love meant saving someone, no matter how many times they drowned themselves. But now, looking at the stack of evidence on my table, I realized love sometimes means stepping aside and letting the consequences do the teaching. By the end of that week, everything was in place. The bank, the police, airport security, all coordinated. Detective Harris called me one evening. "They land on Saturday," he told me. "Don't worry, Mrs. Turner. We'll take care of it. You don't even need to be there." For a moment, I considered going, to stand at the gate, arms folded, watching their smug faces crumble. But then I decided against it. This wasn't about theatrics. It wasn't about making a scene. No, the sweetest justice would be letting them discover on their own that the world doesn't bend forever to their cruelty. So I stayed home. I watered my roses. I baked a small loaf of bread. And I waited. I knew Saturday would bring something neither David nor Lacey ever expected. They thought I was too weak to fight back. But they had forgotten something important. The quiet ones are the most dangerous. Saturday crept closer with every tick of the clock, but instead of feeling nervous, I felt steady, almost like I was standing on the shore watching a storm roll in. The winds were picking up, but I knew it wasn't my house that would be struck by lightning this time. In the days leading up to their return, I did what I had been doing all along, watching. Their entire trip was paraded across the internet for anyone with eyes to see. I didn't need a private investigator. I had their own arrogance, their constant need to flaunt. There was Lacey, stretched out on a white sand beach in a bikini that probably cost more than my entire grocery budget for a month. Her caption read, "Cheers to freedom. No nagging, no guilt, just paradise." A laughing emoji followed. My son stood beside her in another photo, shirt unbuttoned, sunglasses perched on his nose. He was holding a cocktail in one hand and tossing his other arm around her shoulders like he had the world at his feet. "Living like kings?" he'd written. Kings and queens. That seemed to be their favorite phrase. Kings and queens, on my dime. Each time I saw a new post, I printed it, slipped it into the folder, and stacked it neatly with the others. I began to think of that folder as my shield. Not just paper and ink, but a fortress of truth that no amount of excuses could break down. And yet, beneath the calm, there were moments that stung deeply, like when I saw the comments. Lacey's friends chiming in, "Must be nice to have such a generous MIL, haha." Or, "She doesn't even notice. Lucky break for you guys." Lucky break. That phrase cut worse than any insult, because it told me the truth. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was entertainment, for them. A running joke, with me cast as the fool. I sat at my kitchen table late one night, scrolling through their posts, and I remembered something from years ago. It was my birthday. I had baked my own cake because no one else had the time. They'd come by in the evening, distracted, half-hearted, rushing through dinner so they could meet friends afterward. Lacey had given me a sweater 2 sizes too big, tags still dangling, clearly an afterthought. I had smiled anyway, because mothers learn to swallow disappointments. But that night, after they left, I'd sat on the edge of my bed and whispered to my late husband's picture, "Is this what family feels like now?" And here I was again, years later, holding the same question. Only this time, I wasn't whispering into the dark. This time, I had proof. And this time, I wasn't going to swallow it. As the week passed, their photos shifted from beaches to shopping malls, pictures of shiny bags with luxury logos stacked on the hotel bed, shoes lined up in pairs, 6, 7, 8 boxes of them. Lacey tagged one photo. When Grandma pays, you don't look at price tags. That one hurt, not because of the money, but because of the sheer disrespect. I thought of the sacrifices I had made. The nights I skipped dinners so David could have shoes for school. The second job I took so he could go to college without loans. All the years of careful saving, just for them to treat my life's work like a scratch card they could cash in whenever it suited them. But instead of crying, I found myself smiling. Not a joyful smile, but a knowing one. Because every post, every smug little caption, was a brick in the wall of their undoing. On Friday evening, the night before they were scheduled to land, I received a call from Detective Harris. His voice was calm, steady. "Mrs. Turner," he said, "everything's confirmed. We'll be waiting for them at the gate. You don't need to worry. About a thing?" I thanked him, my voice quiet but firm. And after I hung up, I sat in the living room with my cup of tea, staring at the framed photo of my husband on the mantel. "You were right," I whispered. "Respect and trust aren't the same. And tomorrow, they're going to learn that the hard way." I slept soundly that night for the first time in weeks, because justice was finally in motion. And when the sun rose on Saturday, I went about my day as usual. I watered the roses, folded the laundry, and baked a pie. While thousands of feet above the ground, my son and his wife were laughing, dreaming of walking off that plane into comfort. They had no idea that their welcome home party was waiting for them, not with open arms, but with handcuffs. Saturday morning felt strangely ordinary. I woke with the same stiffness in my knees, shuffled to the kitchen, brewed my tea. But beneath that quiet routine, a current of anticipation thrummed through me. Today was the day. I didn't go to the airport. No, that wasn't my place. I didn't need to see their faces when reality crashed down. That part I left to the officers and the system I had trusted to carry the weight of justice. My job was done. My evidence was in their hands. Still, my imagination carried me there. I could see it as clear as if I had been sitting on one of those stiff vinyl benches in the terminal. The plane touched down. The passengers, sunburned and weary, shuffled into the gate, dragging their carry-ons, scrolling their phones. And then came David and Lacey, still tan, still smug. I pictured Lacey adjusting her sunglasses, tugging her designer tote higher on her shoulder, the one she had bragged about online. David, looking relaxed, probably expecting me to be waiting outside with the car, like a dutiful mother. They thought life was just going to slide back into place. But instead of me, there were uniformed officers. "David Turner? Lacey Turner?" The smiles slipped. Confusion flickered. Then panic. Travelers slowed, watching. Children tugged at their parents' hands, pointing. The officers stepped closer, papers in hand. "You're under arrest for credit card fraud and grand larceny. Please place your bags on the floor." I could almost hear Lacey's shrill laugh, that fake little chuckle she used when she thought she could talk her way out of anything. "Oh, this must be a mistake. That's family money. My husband's mother, she let us..." But the officers weren't swayed. They had the statements. They had the screenshots. They had my neat folder of evidence, each page lined up like a witness against them. David's face in my mind had gone pale. He'd always hated confrontation. He probably mumbled something about it being a misunderstanding, glancing around at the growing crowd. But there was no misunderstanding this time. No mother stepping in to smooth things over, no quick excuse to save face. Click. The sound of metal cuffs. I don't know if they begged or shouted. I don't know if they dropped their bags or tried to hold on to them. What I do know, because Detective Harris told me later, was that by the time they were escorted out of the terminal, the bystanders were staring in stunned silence. Some even pulled out their phones, snapping pictures, recording video. Imagine that. The same people who had flaunted their luxury trip online now being paraded through an airport in cuffs for the whole world to see. A different kind of post, a different kind of audience. Back in my house, I didn't cheer. I didn't clap my hands or dance in the kitchen. That's not who I am. I simply sat in my chair, folded the laundry resting in my lap, and let out a long, steady breath. The phone rang not long after. It was Detective Harris. "Mrs. Turner, they've been taken into custody. Everything went smoothly." I thanked him quietly, my voice steady. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "You should know. They didn't take it well. They'll likely try to contact you." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. "Let them try," I said. Sure enough, the calls started within hours. My phone buzzed with David's number first, then Lacey's, then messages. "Mum, please, you don't understand. And how could you do this to us? We're family." Family. That word tasted bitter now. I didn't answer. I let the silence stand. Because for once, silence was power. Later that evening, as I stood in my garden, the crickets humming in the background, I thought about how fragile dignity can feel, how quickly people you love can strip it from you if you let them. But I also thought about how strong it can be, too, if you choose to protect it. My roses glowed faintly in the twilight. Their petals were soft, but their stems carried thorns sharp enough to draw blood. I smiled, realizing I had finally learned to be like them, gentle where I chose, but not defenseless. They had mocked me as the old lady, but when those handcuffs closed around their wrists, it wasn't age that defined me. It was strength, and that was only the beginning of what came after. The house felt unusually quiet that night, though nothing had changed. The same clock ticked on the wall, the same kettle whistled on the stove. But inside me, something had shifted. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a background character in my own life. I felt like I had finally stepped into the center of the stage, even if it was a stage built from pain. The calls kept coming. At first, I ignored them, letting the phone buzz and buzz until the silence returned. But eventually, my answering machine filled with messages, and against my better judgment, I listened. David's voice cracked with desperation. "Mom, I don't know what you told them, but this is insane. We didn't steal. It was just borrowing. Please talk to the police. Fix this. You can fix this." Borrowing. That word nearly made me laugh, though there was no humor in it. Borrowing is what you do with permission. Borrowing is what you repay. What they did was theft, plain and simple. Then came Lacey's voice, sharper, dripping with venom. "You didn't have to go this far. Do you know how humiliating this was? People recorded us. Everyone saw. You'll regret this when the family turns on you. You're supposed to protect us, not ruin us." Ruin them. As if I had planned their downfall like some vindictive villain. They had ruined themselves. I'd only pulled back the curtain. By Sunday morning, the whispers had started. My sister called, her voice hesitant. "Mildred, I heard what happened. People are saying you called the police on your own son. Is that true?" I answered simply, "Yes." There was silence on the line, then a sigh. "Some folks think you went too far." I smiled bitterly. Some folks didn't have their life savings drained while being called an old bat online. Because that was the part everyone overlooked. The respect. Money can be replaced. Dignity cannot. By Monday, David was released on bail. He showed up at my door, looking nothing like the smug man in those beach photos. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes hollow. "Mum, please," he whispered, as if he were 12 years old again asking for forgiveness after breaking a neighbor's window. "I'll pay it back. Just tell them you don't want to press charges." I studied him, my own son, the boy I had once rocked to sleep, the man I had defended to relatives when he stumbled through one failure after another. and for a brief second, my heart ached with the memory of love. But then I remembered the screenshot. Lacey's words, laughing about living like queens on my dime. I remembered the post. Finally? A trip without the old lady. I remembered every sacrifice, every penny-pinching meal I had endured so they could stand there with smug smiles and treat me like a joke. I shook my head slowly. No, David, not this time. You'll face the consequences. His shoulders slumped. He muttered something under his breath, turned, and left. That night, I pulled out my will. It was something I hadn't looked at in years, tucked neatly in a folder with my lawyer's card clipped to it. I sat at the kitchen table, red pen in hand, and began making changes. I reduced David's share significantly, leaving a token amount, enough to remind him that I had once loved him, but not enough to give him another chance to squander what I had worked for. The rest I redirected, some to charity, some to scholarships for children who had no one else, and a generous portion to my granddaughter, because she, at least, still treated me with kindness. It felt liberating, like I had closed a chapter that had weighed on me far too long. Later that week, my neighbour Teresa stopped by. She set down a basket of muffins and shook her head. You know, Mildred, people are talking, but between you and me, good for you. Too many of us stay silent and let the younger ones walk all over us. I smiled at her, a tired but genuine smile. It's not about revenge, Teresa. It's about reminding them, and myself, that I still matter, because that was the heart of it. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't disposable. I wasn't just the old lady. I was Mildred Turner, a woman who had built a life brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. And if they thought they could tear that down with greed and cruelty, they were sorely mistaken. As the sun set that evening, I sat on the porch, sipping tea, listening to the quiet. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't a lonely quiet. It was peace. When the dust finally settled, I sat back and realized something important. This wasn't just about money. It never was. It was about respect, about being seen as more than a wallet or a burden. Yes, David and Lacey got what was coming. The police did their job. The bank reversed what it could. And I changed my will to make sure my hard-earned savings would never again be wasted on greed. That part of the story is finished. But the lesson, that's what I carry with me. I used to believe that protecting family meant shielding them from consequences. I thought love was measured by how much you could give, how much you could forgive. But age has taught me something else. Real love doesn't mean letting people walk over you. Real love sometimes means stepping back and saying, enough. They mocked me as the old lady. They thought I was blind, weak, easy to fool. Instead, they learned that age isn't weakness. It's clarity. It's knowing when to stop playing the fool. To anyone watching who has felt invisible, who has been treated as if their worth ended the moment their youth did, hear me. You are not powerless. You still have a voice. You still matter. And you deserve respect. I may be 74, but I'm not finished. My story isn't just about betrayal. It's about dignity, about reminding myself and the world that I won't be erased. So I'll end by asking you, just as I did at the beginning, where are you watching from? And more importantly, if you were in my shoes, would you forgive? Or would you do what I did and let the truth finally speak louder than silence?